Okay, so last video stopped kind of in the middle of a paragraph because I can only tape 15 minutes, so it stopped. So I'm back on page 42. See where the word farthing is, which was the word that was on one of the coins that Lars was using to play puzzle caps. Okay, so farthing. The rest of the letters were too worn to read, but now I remembered what a farthing was. I also recognized the boy's clipped accent. Hey, are you British or something? My folks had been to England. They brought me back one of each kind of coin, a farthing, sort of like this one, and a tuppence, and even a ha'penny, like in the Christmas is a-comin' song. The boy looked at me with such an odd expression that I thought I'd put my foot in my mouth again. I plunged on awkwardly. You're not British, right? Sorry, I'm new here myself, and I figured I'd better change the subject. I like your costume. Where'd you get it? My mother made it, from start to finish. It took her well nigh a fortnight just to weave the linsey-woolsey on her loom. Again, I was impressed how much Pennsylvanians did for Halloween. Then I recalled that even in Minnesota, I knew some moms who were into weaving. What are you supposed to be? I asked. My mother's words about Uncle George's long-haired face popped into my head, and I made a wild guess. A hippie? Nah, said the boy, with a smile and a shake of his head. Now don't tell me. Let me guess. Are you supposed to be George Washington? He wore a funny hat like that, but you know, your hair's all wrong. His was all curly and white. The boy chuckled. That was a wig, Lars. I feared you would be ignorant, but not as ignorant as that. My jaw must have dropped to my knees. How did you know my name? I managed to ask. He picked up his hat and put the farthings in his pocket. I heard your mother call you that, he said nonchalantly. But how did you hear? He ignored my question. Come play ducks and drakes, he said. Yonder's a prime spot for it. The run's wider there. He quickly walked toward the stream. I followed, intrigued, and soon learned that ducks and drakes was his name for skipping rocks, something I was really good at, having grown up in the land of 10,000 lakes. My companion told me I was a dab hand at ducks and drakes. I figured that was a compliment and returned it, because he was a good rock skipper too. Unfortunately, he bounced away from my questions as expertly as he skipped stones. After we were about skipped out, he turned to me and said, "'Tis good you've moved into Penncroft Farm." Suddenly he plucked the tricorn off his head and sailed it into the air. I dashed forward, caught it, and lobbed it back to him. We tossed the hat back and forth like a frisbee until we reached the old split-rail fence bordering Penncroft Farm. My new friend climbed up the zigzag rails and straddled the top. It always seemed a waste of time to build fences around apple trees. They weren't about to run off. But the law said all farms had to be fenced. These stake and rider fencers were the very devil to build. But they've weathered well, he remarked. Stake and... I began, but just then I spotted my mom waiting at the end of the driveway by the Penncroft Farm sign. She was shading her eyes and looking anxiously down the road. When she saw me, she waved and started toward me. I've been waiting for you to get home, Lars, she said as she came closer. How'd it go at school? Did you make any friends yet? Well, yeah, this guy, I said, jabbing my thumb behind me toward the fence. Mom looked to where I pointed. She frowned. What guy? This guy right. I whirled around. My newfound friend was nowhere to be seen. The stake and rider fence was riderless. Okay, let's keep on going. I have 11 minutes left. So chapter 4, Raising the Shade. So different chapter, probably different setting, possibly, or time. So Saturday. Yeah, Saturday I planned on sleeping in. But it was clear that my parents had different plans for me. At 7:30, my mother invaded my room. Time to get up, Lars. We need you to clean out the barn so we can stick the empty cartons in there. The whole barn? All by myself? I squawked. At least the ground floor, she said, relenting. Be glad the barn's only half its original size. There used to be a whole other wing. The foundation's still there." "What happened to it?" I murmured sleepily, playing for time. "It caught on fire ages ago. Probably hit by lightning. The fire was put out, but only half the barn was saved." Dad poked his head through the doorway. "Come on, Lars, hop to it. You've got to clear away the junk and rake out the barn. But do me a favor. Stay away from that wagon." I glanced guiltily at Dad and saw the meaningful look he exchanged with my mother. "Guess I'll start on my study," he said, backing out again. Mom sat down on my bed. "By the way, Lars, I want to talk to you about something." She cleared her throat. "I thought you'd outgrown imaginary friends." "But, Mom, there really was a kid on the fence," I protested. "I met him on the road." "Then he disappeared into thin air, like the guy at the window and the mysterious superhero on the wagon?" she said with a skeptical smile. "Now look, honey, I know you have been through a lot and really miss your old friends, but you'll make new friends sooner than you think. So please give up this imaginary stuff and don't pester Aunt Cass with such nonsense, okay?" I grunted. Luckily, she took that for a sign of agreement. As she got up to leave, her glance fell on the space next to old George's portrait. "I think I'll fill that empty spot with a map of Pennsylvania," she said. "What a shame to break up the Peel paintings. From what Aunt Cass says, George's wife was quite a fascinating woman. You wouldn't believe what she did during the Revolution." I yawned and pulled the covers over my head. Mom pulled them right off again. "I'm not leaving this room until you're vertical," she said sternly, planting her hands on her hips. "I'm vertical! I'm vertical!" I retorted, climbing reluctantly out of bed. After Mom left, I pulled on my jeans and rummaged through cartons looking for my Minnesota Twins sweatshirt. It was easy for Mom to say I'd have new friends soon. She didn't know what a disaster my first day had been. I'd only given her the usual string of fines when she asked how things had gone. At least I had a whole weekend before I had to face those kids again. Even raking out the barn was better than that. Aunt Cass was in the kitchen when I got there. She placed a bowl of oatmeal and a small blue pitcher of thick cream on the table and asked me if I'd slept well. "Yep, my bed wasn't too short, wasn't too long," I joked. "In fact, it was just right." "Funny how that happens sometimes," she replied, her face perfectly straight. She sat down next to me. I shook my spoon at her. "Not all that funny," I said. For the next few minutes I wolfed down oatmeal, Aunt Cass watching with a look of satisfaction. I decided to ignore Mom's instructions about pestering my great aunt. "You know, my bed's not the only funny thing around here," I began tentatively. "There was that guy I saw in the window, and then yesterday I met someone who did an incredible disappearing act. One second he was there, the next he wasn't." Aunt Cass gazed at me. "What did he look like?" she asked in a low voice. "It's a little hard to say. He was all dressed up for Halloween in a George Washington costume, and there was something else funny about him. He knew my name. He said he heard Mom call me that, so he must live really close by. Do you know who he could be?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, perhaps I do. But I wouldn't exactly say he lives around here." "Oh," I said, disappointed. "I was hoping he might be somebody to hang out with." "What about Pat Hargraves?" she said, her mouth quirking up at the corners. "Didn't you meet her at school yesterday? Come on, George, don't tell me you don't like Pat just because she's a girl." "She's all right, Aunt Cass, but—" "Good, because she'll be here later this morning. Her folks are coming over to do me a favor, and I expect you to be hospitable." "Yeah, okay," I said. I cleared my dishes and headed outside to the barn. The wooden sides of the barn, or what was left of it, were weathered to a gray that matched the foundation stones. There was a full top story, but because the barn was set into the hill, the ground floor was only about the size of our Minneapolis garage, much to my relief. A wide door ran across the lower level. I gave it a shove, and the door creaked open on ancient iron hinges. I entered the dark inside, groping for a light switch as I went. I couldn't find one. "Swell. How can I clean this place if I can't see what I'm doing?" I asked, wasting good sarcasm on an empty barn. Moving gingerly along the wall, I touched a large, round, metallic object that felt nothing like a light switch. It clattered to the floor. I slid my foot around until I found it, then carried it across to the door for a closer look. It was a flat metal sieve, covered with cobwebs, red with rust, and bigger than any sieve I'd ever seen. Perplexed, I murmured, I'd hate to have to eat any macaroni that was strained in this, whatever it is. "'Tis a riddle," said a voice in my ear. I whirled around. It was the kid I'd met at the bridge. "Why, you're still dressed up as Washington!" I exclaimed. The boy's bright blue eyes crinkled with amusement. "'Tis my only costume. My mother had little time to make me fancy dudes." "I know what you mean. My mom's never been much for sewing either," I said, relieved to have some common ground with this guy. She'd rather spend her spare time reading. Ah, Sandra always did have her nose in a book. Me, I never cottoned much to anything but ciphering, doing sums and such, when I was your age. I did learn reading properly enough later on," he said proudly. He doesn't look all that much older than me, I thought indignantly. Then when he'd said about ciphering sank in, and I perked up. Then what he'd said about ciphering sank in, and I perked up. Maybe I'd found somebody who liked secret codes as much as I did. But I'd never heard of using addition to break one. Eagerly I turned to him and asked if he went to any school. "Nah, nor any other. My mother learned me with a horn book." "You lucky dog! Wish I didn't have to, especially here in Pennsylvania." I started to make a face, but remembered this kid was as Pennsylvanian as the ones at school. "Ah, you left so suddenly yesterday that I didn't get a chance to ask what your name is," I said, feeling awkward. "My name's Geordie," he said, looking amused. "How do you do, Gordy?" "No, Lars, not Gordy. My name's Geordie." "Geordie, how do you do?" I reached out to shake hands. But instead of shaking hands, Geordie went all stiff and bent over in a bow, like the ones my piano teacher made us do in recitals. I went still, too, from amazement. Then, feeling self-conscious, I bowed back. As I bent over, I noticed I was still holding the rusty old sieve in my left hand. "Now about this riddle, Geordie, I guess I just don't get what you mean." Geordie took the sieve, turned it over thoughtfully. I noticed that his fingernails were bitten to the quick. "'Tis a riddle. Leastwise, that's what we always called it," he explained. "It's for cleaning all the dirt and dust out of wheat. I spent many a winter evening shaking this riddle. Actually, I much preferred my outdoor tasks, like making perry in the fall, when the picking was done." "Making what?" "A perry. Cider from pears instead of apples. A hard cider, fermented into alcohol," Geordie said. "And there were plenty of other chores to do, picking apples and pruning trees, and all the other farm and orchard tasks. Then after my brother, Will, left home, I also had to deliver the perry and cider and fruit to the inns and take it into Philadelphia on market days. 'Twas difficult, but father insisted I was grown enough to shoulder my brother's work as well as my own." I nodded emphatically. "I know what you mean. I got the same routine after Peter moved out. You're the chief helper now, Lars. Besides, lucky Peter gets to stay in Minnesota." The realization hit me that if I'd stayed in Minnesota, I wouldn't have met Geordie. Maybe Peter wasn't so lucky after all. "Where did your brother go, Geordie? Off to college like Peter?" I asked. "Nay, college was too dear for the likes of us," he replied. I wondered briefly if dear was some Pennsylvania way of saying neat, like we used to say sweet back in Minnesota. But that didn't make any sense either. "What do you mean by dear, Geordie?" "'Twas too costly, too expensive," he said softly. "Didn't your brother apply for a scholarship?" "Nay, Will went off to be a soldier in '77. My father nearly had a